All right, welcome to another deep dive into, I guess you could say a pretty big name.
A big one.
In the world.
Yeah, definitely.
World of the internet, world of technology. Larry Page, co-founder of Google. And
Alphabet Inc.
Alphabet Inc., yeah. It's hard to imagine the internet without...
the internet before Google.
Google, yeah.
It's kind of hard to fathom.
What would it look like?
Right. What would we even...
How would you even find anything?
I mean, there were definitely search engines before Google, but Google was sort of the one that...
This absolutely blew
everything else
out of the water, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think it's safe to say he's had a pretty big impact on our world.
So to do this deep dive, we've got, like we always do, a great source here. Looks like his Wikipedia entry should be pretty thorough.
Yeah. Wikimedia is great for this kind of thing. It's just, nicely organized, gives you the whole overview.
I mean, that's what our listeners have told us they want. They want that full picture.
Right.
Not to spend 2 hours just getting through like the first couple years of his life.
Yeah, they want the sort of the highlights.
Yeah.
The key moments.
Exactly. Those key moments, those highlights. And we're going to find them in here. So let's dig in. Let's start at the beginning, I guess. Where did this all begin for Lady Page?
Well, the story begins in Lansing, Michigan, where he was born on March 26, 1973. And I guess even before we go much further, it's worth just noting this interesting fact, this really interesting detail from his childhood. Both of his parents were involved in computer science. His father actually held a Doctor of Philosophy degree in computer science and was a professor, and his mother was a computer programming instructor.
Wow. I mean, you could say he was kind of...
Yeah, almost destined, right.
Destined to be in technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what was it like for him growing up?
Well, based on what the Wikipedia entry tells us, it sounds like his house was, probably your typical kind of messy, chaotic environment, but with a tech twist, right? It was usually a mess, with computers, science and technology magazines all over the place. It even mentions popular science magazines.
I love popular science, yeah. So, I mean, how do you think that really kind of shaped his early development, being in that kind of environments from day one?
I think it was huge. Just having that constant exposure to technology, to computers, it just creates a natural curiosity and also a familiarity. Like, computers aren't this scary, unknown thing that's just part of everyday life. And there's a writer, Nicholas Carlson, who wrote a book about Google, and he really emphasizes how this kind of environment, especially combined with parents who were both knowledgeable and supportive, really nurtured that creative spark in him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about being around it, right? Like, you have to have that.
You have to be encouraged to explore, to experiment.
Yeah. And
it sounds like he definitely had that. And then there's this great anecdote about when he was 6 years old, his father brought home a computer, an Exidy Sorcerer. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I don't think so.
It was one of those early kind of home computers. Anyway, Larry, he just took to it immediately. And apparently, he actually became the first kid in his entire elementary school to turn in an assignment from a word processor. 6 years old.
Wow. That is early adoption. I mean, he was like a beta tester of life.
Right.
I mean, so at that point, were there signs that this was more than just a passing interest?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things. First of all, you have this constant tinkering. As a kid, he would take apart anything he could get his hands on. Toasters, radios, you name it. He just had this innate need to understand how things worked. And then, and this is amazing, by the age of 12, he already knew he wanted to start a company, like specifically a company focused on technology and business.
At 12?
Yeah, he was already thinking about the intersection of those two worlds.
Wow. I mean, most 12-year-olds are thinking about, video games and...
Right, or like what they're going to have for lunch.
Exactly.
But he was thinking about starting companies. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say there were signs, right?
So it's interesting. The Wikipedia entry also mentions that he played the flute and saxophone and even attended this Interlochen arts camp.
Yeah, music was actually a big part of his life, too.
It's not something you'd immediately associate with like a tech.
No, not really, but I think it's a really interesting aspect of his story. He actually believed that his music training had a direct impact on how he approached technology.
Interesting. How so?
Well, he talked about how music, especially playing in ensembles, teaches you about timing, about precision, and he felt that this really influenced his focus on speed and responsiveness in technology. Like with Google, he was obsessed with making things fast, with minimizing lag, and he felt that this came in part from his music background.
So he saw a connection between the two.
He even made a comparison to being a percussionist, saying that in music, timing has to be so precise, and he felt that this kind of thinking carried over to his work with Google.
It's really cool to see those connections, across different disciplines.
It is. It shows how diverse interests can actually inform and enhance each other.
Right. So, okay, we've got this kid who's taking things apart. He's playing music. He's already got this entrepreneurial vision.
Mm-hmm.
What about his formal education?
So he went to Okemos Montessori School and then East Lansing High School, graduating in 1991, and, continuing that music thread, he actually spent some time at Interlochen Center for the Arts during summer school. For college, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering with honors from the University of Michigan in 1995, and then he went on to get a Master of Science in Computer Science from Stanford in 1998.
So a pretty clear path.
Yeah, solid foundation in the core technical skills.
But it sounds like even during those university years, he wasn't just, hitting the books. He was already putting those skills to use in some pretty creative ways.
Absolutely. Like at the University of Michigan, there's this great story about how he wanted to print out these huge posters. But back then, large format printers were really expensive. So what did he do? He built his own inkjet printer out Lego bricks.
Out of Legos?
Yeah, like literally Lego. It was basically a line plotter, but still pretty ingenious for a college student. He even reverse engineered the ink cartridges and figured out all the electronics and mechanics himself.
So resourceful. And I guess that entrepreneurial spirit was already kicking in because he also tried to, revolutionize the university's transportation system?
Yeah, he actually proposed replacing the entire bus system with a personal rapid transit system. Those kind of driverless monorails. It was a pretty ambitious idea. And then on a slightly smaller scale, he also developed a business plan for a music synthesizer software company.
Okay, so he's building things, he's coming up with business ideas, and he's also president of the Eta Kappa Nu Honor Society. And then he was on the solar car team, too.
Yeah, the 1993 Maize and Blue solar car team. Clearly a busy and very productive time.
Okay, so lots going on, but then he heads to Stanford for his master's. And this is where things really start to take shape, I guess, in terms of, what would eventually become Google.
Exactly. So he's at Stanford, and he's thinking about potential dissertation topics. And one idea that really grabs his attention is this concept of exploring the World Wide Web, but not in the way that most people were thinking about it at the time. He wanted to explore it as a massive graph, like a mathematical graph, where all the web pages are nodes and the links between them are the edges.
It's funny to think now we just take that for granted, right? Of course, the internet's a giant network.
Yeah, but back then, this was a pretty novel way of looking at it. And his advisor, Terry Winograd, a renowned computer scientist, really encouraged him to pursue this line of thinking. Page actually later said that Winograd's advice was the best he ever received. And it's interesting to note, he also briefly considered other research areas, things like telepresence and even self-driving cars.
Self-driving cars, wow. Head of the curve, as always.
Yeah, but ultimately he settled on the web as a graph.
So can you kind of explain the core insight there? What was so groundbreaking about viewing the web this way?
The key was in the backlinks, the links on one web page that point to another web page. Page had this idea that these backlinks were kind of like citations in academic papers. If a web page has a lot of backlinks from other reputable websites, it's kind of like that web page is being cited as a source, as an authority.
Like a vote of confidence, almost.
Exactly. And the more high-quality backlinks a page has, the more important and authoritative it probably is. This was the core idea that would eventually lead to PageRank.
Got it. And this is where Sergey Brin enters the picture, right?
Right. So Sergey Brin was also a PhD student at Stanford, and he joined Page's research project, which at that time was nicknamed Backrub. And together they really started to flesh out this idea of analyzing backlinks to determine the importance of web pages. And they even co-authored this really influential research paper called The Anatomy of a Large-Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine. It became super popular in the internet research community.
I love that early name, Backrub.
Yeah. It's a bit clunky, right? That it gets the point across. And it's kind of cool to see those early, almost rough around the edges beginnings of what would become this incredibly sophisticated system. And by the way, Brin himself has talked about how out of all the research groups at Stanford at that time, Page's project was the most exciting to him. Not just because it dealt with the web, which was still a relatively new thing, but also because he found Larry's approach and ideas so compelling.
Yeah, it must have felt like they were really onto something. But how did they actually get from analyzing these backlinks to actually building a search engine?
Well, the big breakthrough, the real ha moment, was the development of the PageRank algorithm. They needed a way to analyze all this backlink data that their web crawler was collecting And PageRank was the answer. It was this brilliant algorithm that could take all those backlinks and use them to rank web pages based on their relevance and quality.
So instead of just looking at the words on the page, it was also looking at the links pointing to the page.
Exactly. And this was a huge leap forward from the other search engines at the time, which were mostly just focused on keywords. PageRank really allowed them to measure the importance of a page in a much more nuanced and accurate way.
So they had this amazing algorithm. What did they do next?
Well, being the resourceful guys that they were, they basically turned Page's dorm room into their hardware lab and Bryn's room into the coding center. And they just started building.
Seriously. From their dorm rooms.
Yeah, it's a classic Silicon Valley origin story. They cobbled together spare computer parts, built their own servers, connected it all to Stanford's network. And by August of 1996, they had a working prototype of their search engine, which they called Google, running on Stanford's website.
And they were off to the races.
Pretty much.
Even in those early days, how much data were they actually dealing with? It's hard to imagine the scale of the web back then.
It was already pretty substantial. Even back in August 1996, their system, which they called Backrub at the time, had indexed over 75 million HTML URLs and downloaded over 200 gigabytes of content.
Wow.
Yeah, and all of this was running on Java and Python, which were the languages they chose to build the system. As word got around Stanford, more and more people started using their search engine, and the number of queries just kept growing.
That must have been exciting.
Oh, absolutely. By mid-1998, they were processing around 10,000 searches per day, and it was around that time, as Page himself put it, that they figured maybe this is real.
10,000 searches a day. That's pretty real. I mean, you can't ignore that.
Right.
And it's often said that Google changed the way we access information. Like, there's this comparison to Gutenberg's printing press.
Yeah, that's a really powerful analogy. Like, just as the printing press made it possible to mass-produce books and spread knowledge much more widely, Google made it possible for anyone with an internet connection to access a vast universe of information. And this wasn't just about web pages. They were already thinking about things like digitizing books and making medical information more accessible.
And it was this potential, this ability to impact the world that really drove them, right?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't just about building a cool search engine. They really believed they were creating something that could change the world.
So how did they go from this university project to an actual company?
Well, in 1998, things started moving pretty quickly. They realized they needed more resources, more servers, more space, so they started looking for funding. They talked to faculty members, family, friend, and in a very Silicon Valley moment, they got a $100,000 check from Andy Bechtelheim, a co-founder of Sun Microsystems.
That's a pretty good start.
Yeah, but here's the funny part. They hadn't actually incorporated the company yet.
Oh, wow.
So they had this check for $100,000 made out to Google Inc., and they couldn't even deposit it for like 2 weeks while they were finalizing the paperwork.
Talk about eager investors. And that initial domain name, Google, I always loved that. Such a massive number, right?
Yeah, it's the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. And they chose it specifically to reflect this idea of organizing a truly vast amount of information.
They had a vision. And that famous garage in Menlo Park, that's where it all happened, right?
Yep. They rented that garage from Susan Wojcicki, who would later become a key figure at Google, for $1,700 a month.
Not a bad deal.
Not bad at all. And they got to work. Page became CEO, Bryn became president, and they had their mission statement: to organize the world information and make it universally accessible and useful. And with an extra $1 million in loans from friends and family, they hired their first employees and moved into a real office in Mountain View by early 2000.
So at this point, Google is growing rapidly. They've got this amazing technology. What was Page like as a leader during those early days?
He was very hands-on, very focused on efficiency and speed. Like in 1999, they were renting space at these third-party data centers, and he was always pushing to get more processing power into the limited space they had. So he started experimenting with using smaller, cheaper servers, and that actually ended up being a key advantage because it allowed them to scale their infrastructure much more quickly and cost-effectively than their competitors.
And by June 2000, they hit a major milestone, indexing 1 billion internet URLs.
Yeah, Google was becoming the go-to search engine, and a lot of that was due to Page's relentless focus on making things fast and efficient. He was also very involved in the product side of things, constantly pushing for a clean, simple user interface. He famously insisted on a very minimalist homepage design because he wanted it to load as quickly as possible.
So speed was key, but I guess leading a growing company is different from, running a research project. Did his leadership style evolve as Google got bigger?
It did, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. His first stint as CEO from 1997 to 2001 was marked by some pretty unconventional management ideas. Like in 2001, he actually tried to get rid of all of Google's project managers. He thought engineers should report directly to a VP of engineering and then to him.
Really? No project managers?
Yeah, he felt that non-engineers didn't really understand the technical details well enough to effectively manage engineering teams, and he was a big believer in cutting out bureaucracy. He even wrote down these management tenets like don't delegate if you can do it yourself and add value, and always offer a constructive alternative when you say no to something. He valued good ideas no matter where they came from, whether it was a senior engineer or a new intern.
That sounds like a pretty intense approach.
It was, and while a lot of engineers actually appreciated his emphasis on technical expertise, the whole no project managers thing didn't really work out. It created some friction and actually led to some employee dissatisfaction.
I can imagine. But even with these, shall we say, unique management ideas, Google was still thriving, right?
Oh yeah, they were growing like crazy. And by 2001, they were getting serious attention from venture capitalists. And with that came pressure to bring in someone with more experience, someone who could build a more traditional, scalable management structure.
So that's where Eric Schmidt comes in.
Exactly. They initially brought Schmidt on as chairman in March 2001, and then he became CEO in August of that year. Page moved into the role of president of products.
So stepping back a bit from the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, but even with Schmidt at the helm, Page was still very involved. Schmidt actually made it a point to consult with Page and Brin on all the major decisions, and within Google, Page was still seen as the ultimate visionary.
And during this time, they made some really key acquisitions like Android, which was huge.
Yeah, Android was a game changer, and that was largely driven by Page. He was the one who really pushed for that $50 million acquisition in 2005. He saw the potential of mobile, of putting Google in everyone's pocket.
That was a pretty smart move.
Understatement. And the interesting thing is, he apparently made that acquisition without Schmidt's initial knowledge or approval. It was that important to him. And it paid off big time. By 2010, Android had become the most popular mobile operating system in the world, surpassing even Apple's iOS.
Wow, that's incredible. So Schmidt's at the helm, Google's expanding rapidly. But then in 2011, Page returns as CEO. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, by 2011, Google was a massive company. Market cap over $180 billion, over 24,000 employees. It had become this sprawling behemoth. And there was a sense that maybe it had lost some of its early agility, some of its focus. And so Page came back to, I guess, try to recapture some of that magic, to inject a new sense of urgency and innovation.
Back to his roots. So what did he focus on during his second time as CEO?
He had a few key priorities. First, he wanted to give more autonomy to the different divisions within Google to let them move faster and be more innovative. So he created this group of senior VPs called the L team who reported directly to him, and he were essentially mini CEOs in charge of key product areas like YouTube and search. He also really focused on improving collaboration and communication across the company. He felt that as Google had gotten bigger, it had become too siloed, too fragmented.
I guess that's a common challenge for large organizations.
It is. And then he also instituted this zero tolerance for fighting policy. It was kind of a funny thing, but it was his way saying, look, we have to work together if we want to achieve these big, ambitious goals. He recognized that internal conflict could really slow them down.
So a more collaborative approach.
Yeah, he had learned from his earlier experiences, and there was also this big push to streamline and simplify Google's products and design.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Project Kennedy, right.
Exactly. It was this huge effort to redesign and unify the look and feel of all of Google's products and applications. They shut down a bunch of old products and services, anything that wasn't really core to their mission. They really wanted to create a more consistent, intuitive user experience.
Makes sense. And he also had a pretty unique way of evaluating potential acquisitions, right? The toothbrush test.
Oh yeah, that was one of his famous sayings. He believed that they should only acquire companies whose products people would use every day and that made their lives better. Like a toothbrush. He wasn't interested in just chasing fleeting trends or quick profits, wanted to build things that had real, lasting value.
And of course, during this time, social media was really exploding. And Google had its own attempt to enter that space with Google+.
Right. Google Plus was their big push into social networking. They launched it in mid-2011, and they really tried to make it a success. They integrated it into all their other products and services, but ultimately it didn't really catch on the way they had hoped.
Yeah, it didn't quite become the Facebook killer.
No, it didn't, but they tried.
And then there was the acquisition of Motorola Mobility, which was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that was a $12.5 billion acquisition in 2011, but it wasn't really about becoming a phone manufacturer. The main reason they bought Motorola was for its patent portfolio.
So it was a defensive move.
Pretty much. They were facing a lot of patent lawsuits from companies like Apple and Microsoft, and they needed to bolster their defenses. And Motorola had a ton of patents, especially in the mobile space.
So they bought the patents to protect Android.
Exactly. And then they ended up selling Motorola's phone business to Lenovo a few years later.
So they got what they needed and moved on. And Google did eventually get more into hardware with things like the Chromebook.
Yeah, they launched the Chromebook in 2012. It was a laptop that ran on their Chrome operating system, which was designed to be lightweight and fast.
It was a new direction for them. And something I always admired about Page was his focus on setting really ambitious goals.
Yeah, he was a big believer in what he called the 10x mentality. He felt that Google should always be striving to make things 10 times better, not just incrementally better.
That's a high bar.
It is, but that was how he thought. He pointed to things like YouTube and Android as examples of crazy ideas that ended up being huge successes.
He was willing to take risks. And he wasn't afraid to talk about the things that worried him either, like the future of the internet.
Yeah, he was increasingly concerned about government regulation and the potential for the internet to become less open and accessible. He felt that companies and individuals needed to fight to protect the freedom and openness of the web.
And then there were those long-term moonshot initiatives like Calico.
Yeah, Calico is this really ambitious project to tackle aging and extend human lifespan. They launched it in 2013, and they brought in Art Levinson, who had been the CEO of Genentech, to lead it.
So they were really serious about it.
Oh, yeah. Page was passionate about this stuff. He believed that technology could be used to solve some of the world's biggest problems, including aging. And he wasn't afraid to invest in these long-term, high-risk projects.
And he even shared some of his broader philosophies on innovation in a TEDx talk.
Yeah, he gave a really interesting TEDx talk in March 2014 where he talked about the role of corporations in driving innovation and the importance of commercializing inventions to make them accessible to everyone. He used examples like Elon Musk's work with SpaceX and Tesla, and he even talked about Nikola Tesla, who was a brilliant inventor but struggled to bring his ideas to market.
It sounds like he was really thinking about the bigger picture.
He was. He wanted Google to be more than just a successful company. He wanted it to be a force for positive change in the world.
And then in 2014, there was another big shakeup at Google. Page stepped back from the day-to-day product decisions.
Right. He wanted to focus more on those moonshot projects, things like Google X, Google Fiber, Nest Labs, and of course Calico. So he handed over the reins of the core Google products to Sundar Pichai, who was already leading Android and Chrome.
And this eventually led to the creation of Alphabet Inc.
Exactly. In August 2015, they announced the formation of Alphabet, this new holding company that would oversee all of their different businesses, including Google. Page became CEO of Alphabet, and Pichai became CEO of Google.
So it was a way to structure the company to better manage its diverse portfolio of businesses.
Yeah. It allowed them to give more independence to the different units to let them operate more like separate companies. And it also gave Page more freedom to focus on the big picture, long-term stuff.
But then, in 2019, he stepped down as CEO of Alphabet, too.
Yeah, he and Sergey Brin jointly announced that they were stepping down, with Pichai taking over as CEO of both Alphabet and Google.
A new era. So what do you think his legacy is?
I think he'll be remembered as one of the most influential figures in the history of technology. He co-founded a company that has literally changed the way we live, work, and communicate.
And it wasn't just about building a successful business. He really wanted to make a difference in the world.
He did. He was always pushing the boundaries of what was possible, investing in these crazy ideas that no one else would touch.
He was a visionary.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this story so inspiring. He shows us that it's possible to achieve incredible things if you're willing to think big and take risks.
And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners. What seemingly impossible ideas are out there today that might become the transformative technologies of tomorrow?
Yeah, what are the next moonshots? What will be the next Google?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
All right, well, thanks for another great deep dive.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep thinking big.
And stay curious.